Hey everyone, Chris Carter here from the Locked On Steelers podcast. We've got Mike DeFabo from The Athletic on. I want to talk to Mike about sleeper options for the Steelers' top two picks in this draft class in the first and third round. Then we get to several of your questions that have called in all throughout the week leading up to the draft. It's the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. More on them later. We're joined by the man himself, Mike DeFabo. He's back from The Athletic. It's great to have you on, Mike. And Mike, it's been a long path to this draft. We are now, this is the Thursday episode. We are now a week away from the first round of the NFL draft, from when things will start to get really real. But now is the time. We've gone over big boards. I have my top 100 board out. You've gone over a lot of picks. Now's the time when we have like the basic things set out and we start to explore what are all the options that could be available to the Steelers. And that's what I want to talk to you today about.
Let's get into it, Chris.
Yes. I'm so excited. But Mike, let's go over something that you wrote a little bit about in the Athletic, and something I talked briefly about this with Nick Emmanwori on yesterday's episode was about sleeper options and about potential. What happens if D tackle just isn't there? What happens if Derek Harmon, Walter Nolan, and Kenneth Grant are just all off the board? I've been screaming that should be their top pick. I think you've been saying that a lot. I think that the majority of people that cover the Steelers are saying that is the primary focus of what the Steelers are looking for right now. But what happens if that isn't the move here? Where do you see them most likely and maybe most beneficially could go with their first round pick?
Yeah, so I completely agree with you, Chris. Like, if you were to ask me what are the top 5 players that I think would go to the Steelers, I would name those 3 defensive linemen that you just named based on the need and also where they're projected to go in the draft. But they just hosted a bunch of top 30 visitors, and I think those provide us some clues as to some other directions they might go. So I just did a story in The Athletic that kind of detailed what I learned from those top 30 visits, and we can dive into a couple of them. The first one I found that was interesting is like the highest rated player that they hosted was Texas A&M edge Shemar Stewart. And I think that he's an interesting guy because he's ranked 9th overall, but he had inconsistent production in terms of sacks. So I think some teams might look at him and be like, I think he had like 4.5 sacks. And they're going to be like, hey, we want a more impactful, obviously, guy. If he were to slip a little bit, he would be interesting because he's not a defensive tackle by name, but he has played everything from the 3 to the 7 technique. So there's a lot of versatility to his game. And I feel like that would be a case where you get a guy in that you didn't think was going to be within your range. And then you basically decide, hey, do we want to bulk this guy up just a bit and turn him into the eventual replacement for Cam Hayward? Or do we want him to be just play on the edge opposite TJ Watt, or eventually well down the line, be a replacement for TJ Watt? So that's one guy. I don't think he's going to be there. I think this was more of a Steelers, let's do our due diligence on a guy that could be best available. But some other positions that really stuck out to me, Texas wide receiver Matthew Golden, they hosted him. He's rated by our draft analyst Dane Brugler as 15th overall. And then South Carolina safety Nick Emmanwori. And so not only was he the only safety that the Steelers brought in for a pre-draft visit, he's the top player at his position. And the dude is a physical freak. He's 6'2", like 220 pounds, runs like a 4.3 40-yard dash, and incredibly physical, can play in the box, but I think also has the versatility to play some free safety. And that one just really stuck out to me because a couple years ago, Darnell Washington was the only tight end that the Steelers brought in. They ended up drafting him. Last year, they brought in 2 inside linebackers. One of them was Peyton Wilson. They ended up drafting him. So this guy just was such an outlier to me that I never would have said first round safety, but maybe they're looking at it like, hey, if we're just objectively ranking best available, like where would he fall within that pecking order? And maybe that's what would entice them.
That could be really interesting. Also, I think it's really, really cool that you bring up two guys in particular, in Shemar Stewart and Nick Emmanwori. Both of those guys with the relative athletic score of a perfect 10.0 at their position, like the best of the best when it comes to what you want at safety, what you want as a lineman, it's athletically, explosively, speed wise, length wise, height, like all of that checks out. And I think that's something that you do draft for. If you're not getting the position of need, you're going best player available, right? You want upside, and athleticism can be the best upside when you're looking at those types of things. Now, I will ask you this, Mike. Do you think the Steelers, looking at Shemar Stewart and the flexibility, that is intriguing, right? But I can hear Steelers fans being like, oh no, is this DeMarvin Leal all over again? Because you have a guy who could be on the outside, could be on the inside. Now, Shemar Stewart, a much better athletic profile than DeMarvin Leal. But is that something that you think the Steelers might back the Steelers off of Stewart? Or do you think that they're like, yeah, we'll look past that because this guy could be that special?
I think that there's a big difference between the two of them in terms of their athleticism. Like you mentioned, like the perfect relative athletic score, like DeMarvin Leal is nowhere near that.
Right.
So I think that when you have a guy that just has this high end of talent, that's pretty intriguing to me. The question I have is opposite. It's about the safety, because like you've got Minka Fitzpatrick signed through 2026. When he signed, he was the highest paid safety. I think he's right now the third highest paid safety. You believe in him. Then they found really a gem and one of the best bargains on their roster with DeShon Elliott. So you kind of are set for safety. So for me, my question is like, if you were to go the safety route, what's the ripple effect? And I could see two ways to kind of justify that. The first one would be you would have to absolutely completely lean into your three safety packages. And there's two different variations the Steelers have. They've got the big nickel, which is traditional, where you just, rather than having a Beanie Bishop type guy at nickel, you're using a safety there. And that affords you flexibility and versatility to disguise your coverages, do some different things, which could be really interesting. So I imagine it would be like, maybe Emmanwori would be that big nickel, or DeShon Elliott would be a guy in the box. And then Minkah would play mostly deep middle. But those guys would be kind of interchangeable. Or would they consider trading Minkah? And would it be a case of, hey, we've got this guy that is every year going to Pro Bowls. It's pretty hard to replace someone like that in one season. But if some guy landed in our lap, now we have that piece. So I think that was the thing that was most intriguing to me. I still think, again, we're talking about sleepers here. I still think it's unlikely they would go that direction, but it is something to consider.
But that's the thing. We're here to explore all the different options, because the best thing you could do is have a contingency plan. That's where I'm at with my stage of the draft process. Now, I feel like I'm very comfortable with the primary targets the Steelers have had. I want to help our listeners and our viewers get a better sense of what are these other guys like? What are these guys like? And to your point about Emmanwori, like that dude, he could play in the box. He could play deep. He has the size and the range to be able to play several different spots. And there's other guys. I really like Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame. I think his ball skills are really impressive. There's other guys that, later in the draft, I think you could get at different positions. But Emmanwori, to me, is my top option. I know a lot of people love Malachi Starks. I just love how Emmanwori tested, how he looks. I think that sure, Starks might have some better tape, but I think the upside of Emmanwori is just so high that if everything else went away in the first round, again, D tackle, and like say a Matthew Golden was gone, I would be really intrigued by that possibility. And about that possibility, because you brought up, and we're going to get to the next segment here about a potential trade for, if you do get a safety, what do you do with Minka Fitzpatrick? Because he's still a big time player. He's still a leader in your defense, but he's had one interception in the last 2 years, and that could cause an interesting discussion about what his true value would be on a trade market. I want to talk about that with you next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Mike, stick with us, everyone. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Game Time, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. Here's why everyone should use Game Time. The all-in pricing means no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay. The seat view feature is a game changer. Before I even hit buy, I can see exactly what my seat will look like in the venue. It's so reassuring. And the best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter here with Mike DeFabo of The Athletic. Mike, we're going to do a quick little change here because I wanted to jump into a different question first, but you bringing up Minka Fitzpatrick and that trade kind of jumps into this question from Josh Downington, PA. As always, if you ever have a question you want to be on that you want to have answered on the Locked On Steelers podcast, just call 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. We'll try to get you on the show. Here's Josh from Downington, PA, asking about trade questions with some of the players on the team. Here's Josh.
Hey, Chris, this is Josh from Downingtown. Just had a quick question. So I know we've been talking a lot about, the ridiculous TJ Watt trade, possibly Minkah, possibly George Pickens. But I wanted to get your take on something that I've been thinking about. We've been seeing a lot of the Steelers looking at safeties in this draft. Do you think there's any chance that they are thinking about possibly shopping DeShon Elliott? His stock's never been higher since he's had probably his best year ever in the NFL with the Steelers. Do you think there's a chance that they may be thinking about shopping him during the draft to maybe recoup a late third round pick, or maybe even an early day 3? Want to get your thoughts on that. Love the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh. As always, call 412-223-6644. Leave your name, give us where you're from, and keep your question under a minute. So, Mike, let's address Minkah first. We'll get to Elliott in a second here. What do you think Minkah fetches on an open market right now? Because, like you said, he's only had one interception in the last 2 years. He is a Pro Bowler. He is a leader. And I think people still see him as that potential superstar guy. He just hasn't had superstar production. Could he fetch the Steelers a third-round pick or something that would be worthy of giving him away?
You look at him, and he does cost a lot of money. He's one of the highest paid safeties, so that's something that you have to factor into it. But he still has a Pro Bowl reputation, and I think that he is better than those raw turnover stats would suggest. He's made a lot of tackles, and he shows his range and his speed, and so I think that there are a lot of teams that still, when you would say, hey, we're interested in potentially moving on from Minka Fitzpatrick, their eyes would light up and they would still think this is one of the best defensive players in the league. Now, I don't know that he still is that. I don't think he is. And I do wonder, is he losing a step? But I think that you would, for the right team, could get a second-round pick. I don't think that it's unreasonable to think about that. Or second to third. I really do. I really feel like that doesn't sound outlandish to me. I don't know about you.
I just don't know how other people still see Minka Fitzpatrick. Because I'm with you in the sense that I think that Minka Fitzpatrick still has this potential. I don't know if it's going to be achieved while he's with the Steelers if they don't have an upgrade in cornerback play. Because when it was Joe Hayden and Steven Nelson, teams were much more careful with when they picked their shots on the outsides, and that forced them to the middle part of the field, which is where Minka Fitzpatrick was always waiting. The Steelers haven't had that kind of cornerback play in some time, and maybe they'll get it. Maybe Porter will rise this year. Maybe Slay will be a good number 2. Maybe they'll find another good number 2, and maybe that will come to fruition and Minka Fitzpatrick will be back this year. But I do think it's something to at least explore to see what would that be. Minka Fitzpatrick is a $22.3 million cap hit this season. If they sent him away, they'd still owe him about $13.7 in dead money, but they'd get about $8.6 more million back into the cap. Granted, you can't really do much with that this year unless you're trading for another player to fill it. But I do think it would be interesting to explore that if they, I think a big part of the if here too is if they land a Nick Emmanwori that you think is the game changer.
Right. Yeah. The first step has to happen. You have to get a high-end safety in the first, second, probably first or second round. And, you mentioned some of those other top safeties, Chris. The Steelers were at their pro days too.
Mm-hmm.
And, that is a position that the Steelers internally feel is a strong position within this draft, is the safety class. So it's definitely interesting to think about. I still believe that probably the most likely scenario is Minkah plays this season with the Steelers. I would say probably like 90%, 95%. But you never know with what could happen in the draft. The other point, you were talking about how tied his turnover numbers are to other players around him. Another big part of that is when defenses are playing a lot of man coverage, that's when you're going to get tip balls and overthrows.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go and you look on YouTube, Minka Fitzpatrick interceptions, all the interceptions of his entire career, practically every single one of them is a tip ball or an overthrow. And that was back when they had really, really good press man corners, and they were getting after the quarterback up front, leading the league in sacks. So for me, if you're looking if Minka's going to be here next year, and we want to see, you want to see him return to his best and be that guy that's changing games and changing outcomes by how he's performing, look for how the cornerbacks perform, and can the Steelers get back to being one of the teams that creates the most havoc up front?
It's a good question. I just wonder, looking at how the Steelers could approach this in different ways. I want to talk also about the DeShon Elliott proposal. That was a big
right. Yeah, we should address the man's question.
Yeah, he's probably like, okay, I get it, Minkah. I want to know about DeShon. Now, DeShon is an interesting prospect here because the real value, it would be a 1-year rental, but he's a $3.75 million cap hit. He's not even $4 million against the cap.
I think he makes less than Miles Killebrew, right?
You're right. Miles Killebrew makes more.
How wild is that?
That is, wow. That's a very.
He honestly might be one of the best bargains in football. That it's crazy.
And so here's the thing about this.
Miles Killebrew makes $4.25 million. He's a safety.
4.2. Yeah,
and he's a fantastic, obvious special teamer. But even when they've lost 4 or 5 safeties, they don't even play him there. He's pretty one-dimensional. So, I mean, DeShon is much more impactful and much more valuable than that.
Agreed entirely. And so, what about the trading DeShon? I hadn't considered that because I thought, hey, when you have a guy like him that's playing well at a low contract, you play that out and then you see where it goes the year after that. Because my thought is, if DeShon Elliott balls out for you again this year, you have the opportunity to reevaluate at the end of the next season and say, do you want to keep him? If not, he goes into free agency. Maybe he does fetch a pretty penny, and then another comp pick in the compensation. Granted, this will be 2 years down the line, but I'm not a big on trading DeShon Elliott. I think he was a good part of the defense last year, and he'll be a good part of the defense this year.
Yeah, I agree with you. So let's look at this from a couple angles. If you're another team, first of all, I don't know that the league as a whole appreciates what Steelers fans who watch every single week have seen from DeShon Elliott.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they picked the wrong safety from the Steelers to go to the Pro Bowl. I think that that's how good DeShon Elliott was last season.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, if you're another team, you're like, hey, this guy's on his 3rd NFL team. He's never really played at this level before. Was it kind of a flash in the pan because he's in the highest paid defense? Or did he kind of benefit from that? So I could see them kind of poking holes in it and wondering, is this sustainable for a guy who just now is producing at this level? I guess the other part of it is I would be curious from the Steelers' perspective. We're talking a lot about TJ Watt is going into the final year of his contract. That's when the Steelers typically like to extend guys. There's other guys like Calvin Austin, who they probably are going to extend going into the final years of their deal. What if instead of trading, you start having a conversation with DeShon Elliott right now about an extension? And I think that could be an interesting route for the Steelers to take. So right now, he played last year, he was 27. He's going to be 28 this year. You extend him until he's 31 years old. I think that would make some sense. You say, hey, you're underpaid right now. We can give you a little pay raise right here, right now. And also you could stick around with this team that you seem to like. I think if I were Omar Khan, I might even consider that path.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine you probably bump his pay up maybe like five, $6, $7, $8 million. Maybe and get to a range where you can say, hey, like this could be your big career contract where you make some real
Right.
money, you get comfortable, you're playing next to guys that you like, and you could be part of that. And I think that could be something that he'd be down for, and I think that would be interesting there. So to answer Josh's question, I don't think they should trade DeShon Elliott. I mean, and hey, if someone comes in with a big offer,
not a crazy question. It's not a crazy question though, because
correct.
if they were to get Emmanwori in the first round, he's physical, he plays in the box, like he could be your DeShon Elliott replacement. So I hear what the listener is saying, and I like the question. It's a good thought exercise. But I personally am a huge fan of DeShon Elliott, and I'd like to see him stick around.
Same here. I think that would be good for the Steelers. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, two more questions that I want to address, and I want to build them off of each other because both of them address the Steelers plan moving forward. We'll discuss that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Mike DeFabo, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I remind you the show is also brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn Jobs clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free. They share it with your network, get qualified candidates all in one place. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job out in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. You can add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture on LinkedIn, and it'll double your reach to qualified candidates. It's no wonder that 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high-quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter, Mike DeFabo. Mike, let's get to our second question here. This one comes from Forrest all the way out in Colorado. Forrest, take it away.
Hey, Chris. Forrest from Colorado. Quick question. I was listening to your show the other day, and you were talking about TJ contract extension. I believe he should remain a Steeler, retire a Steeler, do a deal, something like what they did for Cam. Is there a way, since we have a lot of cap space this year, to do some kind of a balloon payment that he gets more money up front and less as the years go by so that they can do a deal, he stays a Steelers, he gets his money, but the overall average is high, but each year the contract is a little bit less? Just wondered. Thanks. Have a great day. Enjoy the show.
Thank you, Forrest. As always, you can call into the Locked On Steelers podcast, 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. We'll try to get your question on the show. Mike, it's less about paying them less money later. It's about less guaranteed money is the key thing here. If you look at what's reported about Myles Garrett's contract, which is what we're all basing this off of, the Browns reset the market for what a top-level edge rusher is supposed to get paid with the contract that he had. If you look at his contract in the first few years, the guaranteed money is extremely high. But then all of a sudden, when you get those last few years of the contract, it gets less and less. It'd be $13 million in 2028. $4.9 million in 2029, and then in his last 2 years, the last year of his deal, it's straight up, it's nothing. And so that would be the money there. I think that's absolutely what's going to happen. It's different for when you sign a guy when he's 26 or he's 27 or he's 25 years old, like both of these guys did the first time. You're expecting them to play the full out of this contract. But when you're signing guys in their early 30s, even guys as great as Myles Garrett and TJ Watt, owners, GMs, the front offices, they're trying to build up these contracts to give themselves an out if these guys fade with their age when they get into those mid-30 ranges.
Right. Yeah, that's typically what happens. And especially with the Steelers, they're not a big fan of giving guaranteed money past the first year.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of broke a precedent when they signed TJ the first time, or extended him the first time, by giving him guaranteed money, I believe, into his second year of that contract. So I imagine it'll probably be similar, where it'll be the guaranteed money will be up front. I guess the real question, though, is kind of like, there's a lot of complicated stuff that I don't even fully understand about the signing bonus and how that factors into the cap hit. So like that's why, for example, like DK Metcalf signed this huge deal. His cap hit this year is pretty low because you can convert a lot of that to a signing bonus and save yourself some money. Same thing happened last year when they signed Patrick Queen. Patrick Queen's cap hit only this year is fully hitting the cap. So it's kind of like opposite. So like first you give the guaranteed money first, as this caller is talking about, but then you also give the signing bonus early, convert it to signing bonus, so the cap hit's actually lower than what it'll be later on. So that was kind of a long way of saying I think they're going to pay TJ Watt. I think he's going to be a Steeler for a while, and they're going to make the money work. Like the other important thing to remember with all of this is Omar, one of his first jobs was managing the cap. And I remember having a discussion with him at one point, like when I interviewed him right when he got the job. And he said they used to just say like, hey, Omar, we need you to do this. We need you to like make some room. We need you to figure this out. And he would always be like, okay, I could do that. But can you explain to me like why we're here? Like, why did we get ourselves in this situation? So one of the things I'm looking for as he continues to have more time in this organization is like, how does he set himself up long-term to be in good situations? Because there were a lot of cases where they were like, Omar, we're in cap hell, bail us out. I think that he's going to be more forward-thinking, be more cap-conscious in a lot of instances, and keep them in a good situation so that they don't need that bailout.
Well, see, that's the thing. I think a big part of what the Steelers are trying to do is they're trying to keep together a core that can be ready for what I think that they're hoping will be their franchise quarterback in 2026. Again, if you listen to the show, you watch the show, you know I am not big on this quarterback draft class. I think this is a year to draft a backup who's your next Mason Rudolph. But I think next year could be the year. I really like Lenore Sellers. You know, maybe Nussmeier's there. Maybe Iam Aliavia's there. One of those guys. But whoever it is, you need to put yourself in a position where, like in 2004, the Steelers were ready to inherit a Ben Roethlisberger, and Ben Roethlisberger didn't have to be a superstar. He just had to be a good rookie quarterback, which he was, and they went on a run. We went to the AFC Championship game, and they had the foundation to welcome in their quarterback and be competitive. That was a question that Kyle from Virginia asked. Kyle, take it away.
Hey, Chris, how you doing? This is Kyle from Northern Virginia. Was just asking a question in regard to kind of luck and chance. I know you mentioned back in 2004 with Ben Roethlisberger, the roster was set. It was ready to go. We had our playmakers, our weapons on offense. We had a good line, good defense, and he came to us. Was that year, 2004, specifically our plan, like we seem to have made 2026 our plan this year, or was the roster ready? Were we in kind of a semi-limbo waiting for the right quarterback, and Ben kind of just fell to us amidst all the Eli and Rivers debacle at the start of that draft? So are we kind of in the same situation now? Is the second part of that question, if Shedeur falls to us, are we going to take him and have the roster that's ready, or are we going to kind of, do you think, just say no matter what, nothing this year, and let's wait for 26 so we can use more picks to build our roster a little further this year? Let me know your thoughts. Love the show. Keep working, brother. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. As always, 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep a question under a minute. We appreciate everyone who calls into our show. Mike, let's address this. I think, because here's my thing, and I talked about this with Nick Farabaugh yesterday as well. I see Shedeur Sanders as a potential floor raiser, but not a ceiling raiser. He's not a guy that's going to take you to being that Super Bowl contender. He's not going to do what Jaden Daniels did for the Commanders this past year. I think that if everything's already working for you and Shedeur Sanders can be just a solid pick, and it just be like, hey, I could see something like that. I still think he'd need to be developed and take another step there. I think that if you get a true franchise quarterback and you hit on a real high level pick at the position, and you set yourself up with what you do this year, you get the tackle, you get that other playmaker in that running back, you hit on your offensive line, you coalesces and becomes a much better unit. Your playmakers are playmaking on offense. You do the things like in 2004. They had Burris, they had Randall L, they had Hines Ward, they had a good offensive line, they had a run game, they had a defense. You have those pieces in place for next year. And again, this is why you don't trade away TJ Watt. You trade away TJ Watt, that defense ain't going to be anywhere near ready to prepare for getting that quarterback in 2026 or 2027, whenever it's going to happen. That's why I think it is about preparing for that. And I think it's very real that they could prepare for that. And that's why they shouldn't take one this year, so they can continue to prepare to be in that position next year.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Chris. I think if you get a defensive lineman in this year's draft, you've now started to make that position group more of a strength. Now, you also have to prepare for Cam Hayward at some point looking his age, and he defied that last season and surprised a lot of people, and he performed even above what expectations I had for him. I don't think I expected him to come back from surgery, but losing him at some point would be another thing that you would have to address. So I think getting 1 to 2 defensive linemen, especially getting an impact defensive lineman early, helps you at that position. Finding a really good value running back in the 3rd round, I think then all of a sudden you've started to have a reliable running game. I think that would start to set you up. Now, this is kind of an interesting discussion because if you're the Steelers, I think that they try to put together the best team every single season. And what can we do in 2025 to have the best roster? And I think George Pickens is the guy that this conversation should hinge on the most, because if you get Aaron Rodgers, right, I think that there could be this desire, and I think there will be desire to go all in this year and say, we're going to try to give Aaron Rodgers every opportunity to bring a Lombardi to Pittsburgh. So trading George Pickens would be crazy if that's our goal. And I think that that's how the Steelers feel internally about it. That if they were to get Aaron Rodgers, I would be very surprised if they trade George, barring some kind of a messy hold-in situation or him requesting a trade or something like that. But if you're having this discussion like this listener's talking about, hey, what can we do to be in a good position long-term and set up our 2026 quarterback for success? That's the opposite answer. That is, hey, get something from George while you can, because there's no way you're going to extend him. You're not going to sign him after this year. You're going to lose him. Maybe you get a comp pick, but you could get more for him. So I think that's the discussion internally the Steelers should be having here is like, hey, if we get Rodgers, do we really believe that we could win the Super Bowl with him? And if we do believe that, then we need to give TJ an extension and get his salary cap hit lower so we can go find some kind of another trade option and really load up this year. And then the flip side is, if we're playing for the future, maybe it is time to move on from some of these trade candidates that we've been discussing on the show.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see which direction they want to go as far as if they want to trade, because it does kind of tell you which way they're leaning into things as far as what their planning is. Again, right now, their moves tell me they don't see this year as a Super Bowl year. I think Aaron Rodgers is a quarterback that they think can help make them competitive. And like, hey, if they get hot, maybe they could pull off an upset in the playoff. They can get to the playoffs, pull off an upset, and then you're in the tournament. Anything can happen. That's, maybe that's that. But the true investment, the development of what they really want to be, which is a regular legitimately expected Super Bowl contender again, it will take several things happening: the run defense returning, the run game returning, the offensive line being developed, and a system and a flow in the offense that I think needs to be there more consistently, and in a way that when you get that rookie quarterback, you just plop him in and be like, hey, buddy, everybody knows how this works. Just stick to what we're telling you, and it'll be fine. And then when you start to understand the game and you find your feet, then you start to put in your own seasonings. That is the playbook or the recipe that will have you to get to where the Steelers actually want to be. And again, that's why I think it's about the patience right now to get there.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying about these first-round guys. I'm not very sold on Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart. Shedeur, the thing with him is, like, you can obviously tell that he grew up with a father who played in the NFL, and you could tell he's been mentored by Tom Brady because he reads defenses extremely well. His football IQ is really high, and at that position, your brain is one of the most important muscles. The unfortunate thing is he's not the same athlete as his father. He has kind of average size, average mobility, and his arm strength, especially on deep passes, is underwhelming. It's not a high-end trait. And if you're drafting a quarterback in the first round and you're going to be committing to him as your franchise quarterback, you want him to have an elite trait. an elite physical trait, not an intangible one. And I don't know that I see it there. And I think that in some ways, Jackson Dart is a little bit of the flip side, where he has like probably B+ arm strength. It's good. It's definitely very good. And his issue is kind of like the opposite, where, you know, in Lane Kiffin's offense, a lot of what he did was throw into his first read, half field reads, 4 or 5 concepts that they ran over and over and over again. And if the defense did something to throw him off, then he kind of panicked a bit at times. So, you know, he would benefit from coming and sitting behind Aaron Rodgers for a year and then maybe becoming having a chance to start. But I agree with you. Given those question marks that I outlined, I am much more inclined to say, let's just roll with what we got this year. Let's try to see if Aaron Rodgers can win us a playoff game. And then next year, let's swing big. Let's bet real big. And like, you're in a division where you've got 2 MVP candidates at quarterback every year. You know, Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow are going to be in that MVP conversation. Are you content to settle for the 3rd or 4th best quarterback in your own division? Or are you looking to find somebody that could stand toe-to-toe with them? And that's why I think you have to take that big swing.
That's where I think they're lining things up for. He's Mike DeFabo of The Athletic. Mike, thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on all social media at Mike DeFabo. And then check out my stuff in The Athletic. Dane Brugler, who I've been name dropping, he's our draft analyst. He puts out this draft guide called The Beast. Every single player you can ever imagine is ranked, rated, evaluated, personal stuff. He tells you what their mom's name is. He tells you what their dad's name is. He tells you where they went to high school. Everything you can imagine about these guys is in there. I would recommend, even if you think that I'm a blowhard and that you don't like hearing me talk about the Steelers and don't like reading my stuff, just subscribe for Dane. I think it's worth it.
Listen, we like reading your stuff. That's why you're here, Mike DeFabo. He's not a blowhard. He is Mike DeFabo, Steelers reporter of The Athletic. Thank you, Mike, for joining us. And thank you all for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Shout out to Josh, Kyle, and Forge for your questions on the Locked On Steelers call-in line. I'm Chris Carter. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the social media handles, same place everywhere, at Carter Critiques. You can read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. You can find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday. Back here tomorrow with more on the Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.